So we decided to do our research on does education affect employment rates? So our topic is comparing education rates of adults and unemployment rates in a country. Our research will give more insight to whether or not the amount of education you received is important when it comes to getting a job. The two variables that we chose are adult tertiary education rates and the unemployment rates in men versus women. Adult tertiary education rates are an independent variable. It refers to the percent of adults in each country that have graduated post-secondary. Our dependent variable is unemployment rates. It's divided into men versus women. We suspect that there's a relationship between the two variables because the countries with lower education rates have tend to have a higher unemployment rate due to lack of resources to fund an education and provide proper opportunities to those who cannot afford so. Countries with a higher education rate tend to have a lower unemployment rate. This is because there's a good resource division between people, therefore providing more jobs and having a better economy.
We found that unemployment and tertiary education rates can be beneficial to society when examining the importance of education and the economic status of a country. Seeing how these variables are related allows for changes or improvements to be made. For example, if the education rates are decreasing and unemployment rates are increasing, the country can examine why this is happening and enact changes to raise education rates again. Careers that would find this information useful are mainly government jobs, especially those who deal with education funding. They can use this data to determine whether they need to provide more funding in schools or whether they should try and find other solutions to their economic issues such as unemployment. This data can also lead to more questions such as, does education rate depend on the economic state of a country?
This is what we found through our research. So we found that it's better to use the median because it gives a better insight to the average rate of unemployment. This is due to the median being closer to more of the data than the mean because the mean is skewed by outliers. Based on these calculations, it seems like unemployment rates for women are higher than unemployment rates for men. This can be due to many factors such as lower population of women or lack of hires due to barriers women face in the workplace.
Next, we have our histogram for the men's unemployment rates. Through the histogram, you can see that in most countries, the men's unemployment ranges from 4.17% to 8.34%. This means that the majority of countries that were sampled have low male unemployment rates. You can also tell that all of the unemployment rates for men are lower than 16.68%.
This is our histogram for women's unemployment rates. From the women's unemployment rate histogram, you can see that it's a much more spread out graph, meaning that the range is much larger for women who are unemployed. However, the majority of women who are unemployed are still in the same bucket as majority of men who are unemployed, which is between 4.17% and 8.34% of people. The frequency, though, is much higher due to less distribution between the other buckets.
Next, we have our box and whisker plot. There are multiple outliers in our graph for the women's box and whisker plot. We can tell because there are four closed points and one open point exceeding the line of the box and whisker plot. The closed points represent definite outliers, and the open points represent possible outliers. There are outliers in the women's box because there are some countries where women are given less opportunities than men. There aren't outliers for the men because the unemployment rates for men are less spread out due to them being seen as equal in every country, whereas the respect for women in the workplace differs depending on the country. The standard deviation is higher for women because the data is more spread out than for men. As stated previously, this is most likely due to the varying levels of respect for women depending on where you are in the world.
This is our scatter plot for unemployment rates versus tertiary education rates. From this graph, you can tell that there's a stronger correlation between the unemployment rates and education rates for women than there is for men. You can tell this through the correlation coefficient as well, as the correlation coefficient for women is slightly more moderate than it is for men. This shows that only some countries with higher education rates have lower unemployment rates. It also shows that the unemployment rates for women is much higher than that of men. And this is our conclusion.
So, for our relationship and validity, we found that there isn't a very close relationship between our two variables. There are several reasons for that, the first one being outside factors. The first outside factor that we found was working age. Our data shows the education and unemployment rates for those aged 25 to 64. This allows for inaccuracy in our findings because the average working age in different countries may be different. For example, if the working age of a country was younger than 25, the unemployment rate may appear higher for that country than it actually is because most of the people working weren't accounted for in the data. Our next outside factor is economic status. Certain countries may have more or less funds that they are able to put into education. If the country does not have a strong economy, they may not be able to put as much into education, which would then affect people's ability to find a job. Our last outside factor is societal views. Each country has its own set of societal views that depict gender roles and norms. Some countries have equal employment opportunities for men and women, while others prevent women from getting an education and finding a job. This would affect the unemployment rates in different countries based on their different views. Our next reason is sample size. We only had data from 38 out of 196 countries. Our last reason is outliers. Some of the data values were far off from the rest, which skewed the mean and the line of best fit. A closer relationship may have been identified if the outliers weren't included in the data.
Thanks for listening.